Hello and welcome to the only podcast that lulls you into a false sense of security for 9 months talking about Star Wars just to finally talk about Avatar The Last Airbender. I'm Luke.
I'm Max.
And I'm Matt.
And this is Force for Thought.
Presents More for Thought.
More for Thought!
Oh, I did that wrong, didn't I?
It doesn't matter though.
Hello and...
That's how it was supposed to go. I messed it up.
All right.
I shouldn't have rolled it at all, but now we have to wait 30 seconds.
That's fine.
That's hilarious. Don't cut it. Don't cut it.
Hello and welcome back. This week we're doing something a little bit new and different. We've talked about it before, the idea of a More for Thought episode where we talk about something besides Star Wars, because there are certain things that we could discuss that aren't Star Wars and we'd like to. And this week I'm talking about Avatar The Last Airbender. As you know, you've already clicked on this episode. The Netflix live action show came out late last month and I had a chance to watch it. Have you guys watched any of it yet?
I have not. Yeah. I've heard middling reviews.
I'm in the same boat and I don't have any interest. No offense.
We talked before when we were, conceiving the More for Thought idea that we didn't want to do like another Rogue One. We wanted it to be like more of a conversation, not just what one person likes. So maybe in the future we'll go that route. But for today, I like Avatar.
We did do an episode somewhat recently where we just talked about Rebel Moon, and Luke was very adamant that that was not appropriate for the podcast.
Yes.
That was a good example of More for Thought.
That's true. We got an email saying that people agreed with Luke. But only one. So I imagine the other listeners, all 7,000 of you,
of course, yeah,
are on my side.
I bet. All right, Avatar: The Last Airbender. The live action show just came out. It's a live action remake of the 2005 animated show by the same title, Avatar: The Last Airbender. It was originally supposed to be created by the same people that created the animated show. They were heavily involved, and then they left a few years into development.
Interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah, and it was like, big news. It's doomed. It's gonna suck. Bad omen. They left over creative control opposition. They wanted more creative control than they had, and so they left. And I don't know what the problem was, because the live action show is a very direct remake of the animated show.
That's what I was just about to say. How much
almost
creativity do they need?
Exactly. Yeah, it was very much the exact same show. So,
is that good or bad for you?
It has its pros and cons.
Yeah. Because I can imagine seeing the same thing twice is probably odd. But that's how remakes kind of go. But at the same time, like we talked last week in our episode
why we like Star Wars.
Why we like Star Wars when we were wearing the same clothes, and why about it's just weird saying last week and talking about how Star Wars doesn't just builds upon itself. So I wonder, like, you can't really solve that. I'm not sure how Avatar ends or anything. So I don't know if you can expand it, but it'd be interesting, in seeing the live action remake.
You can expand it, and it blows me away that they chose to make this live action remake so just the exact same. Because I mean, out of the Avatar universe, real world, they created Avatar Studios a few years ago. So during COVID, like summer of 2020, Avatar went on Netflix and it had a massive surge in popularity, which was really exciting for me as a lifelong Avatar fan to see all these other people get into it. And, you could talk about it with the average person again, and they knew what you were talking about, and it was a lot of fun. And then a year or so after that, they created Avatar Studios to make a lot more shows and movies going forward. And so this Netflix show benefited greatly from being after that popularity surge and before all of these other shows, because it's like the only Avatar content we've gotten in, 10 years on screen. And even so, the stuff they have coming down the pipeline, like next year, 2025, they have a new movie set post The Last Airbender with those same characters. So there obviously is a way to expand the story going forward.
And that's animated?
Movie.
That's great. Is that animated as well?
Yes, it will be.
Oh, cool.
They're going to have a new show with the next Avatar after Korra, who's the Avatar after Aang. So the Avatar is a cycle, and it's after the Avatar dies, there's a new Avatar in the next element. And so the 4 elements, earth, fire, water, and air, cycle through them. So the last Airbender, Aang, is the air Avatar, and then there was another show with a water Avatar. And then next year, we're going to have an earth Avatar show, which I'm super excited for.
What one would you go with? What?
If I was a bender?
Yeah.
Ooh, I mean, real world, like, it's hard to say because the show bases it around like which one's best in combat and stuff. But I'm not a fighter. I would just want air so that I could fly. You know?
Yeah, I would also do air. I think Maxwell.
Yeah, you could fly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's obvious. Yeah.
Easy call.
But water, you can't drown. Maybe you can. I don't know.
That's true, I guess.
Well, you can't bring the air with you if you go underwater. It'd be a finite amount.
If I really wanted to be like a professional sailor or something, like that would have to be like useful to my life. It'd be the ability to fly. You can just do.
Well, you wanted to be on
anything.
Deadliest Catch.
That's true.
That is Max's lifelong goal. He's just doing this lawyer thing in the meantime.
It's a side gig.
And then in 2026, we have 26 and 27, we have another Zuko movie, which is a character from this show. So really a lot of material to go forward if they chose to, and 2 untitled spin-off series. So a ton of stuff is coming out, and this Netflix show is first. Their good luck, good for them. The show's getting a lot of extra popularity for it. I did like it anyway, and I think it would have done well even without the extra popularity, just because there's something about seeing animation in live action. Like we talked about it a lot with Ahsoka when we got to see, Clone Wars Ahsoka in live action. And yes, it's the exact same as the Clone Wars. Like we've literally seen this before, but just seeing it in this slightly different lens is neat. That appeal did kind of wear off for the show pretty quick.
Because you know what's going to happen next kind of thing.
Right.
Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's probably fun to see how they do that, but at the same time, it's like, okay, well, I know that it's not. You can't like end on a cliffhanger because you already know what's going to happen.
And so it's like,
how 1-to-1 is it? Is it like an episode to episode remake or just like broad strokes?
A little bit of both, because Avatar season 1 is, I want to say, 24 episodes, and this is 8 episodes. But those are 24, 22-minute episodes, and these are 8-hour-long episodes. So it's about the same runtime, but they do condense a lot of the material to be more coherent in a hour-long episode. So, for example, I'll get into the plot. Aang, the Avatar, is frozen in an iceberg for 100 years. He wakes up, and the world's at war. He's the Avatar. It's his responsibility to keep balance in the world, and so he feels a lot of responsibility to end the war and save everyone.
And the Avatar is the only bender who has control of all 4 elements.
Yes, he's the only one with the ability to control all 4 elements. It takes years to master each element, so when the show starts, he only knows air, and he was supposed to learn water, then earth, then fire, but he never did.
I don't know anyone who would have clicked on this without knowing that information, so that was mostly just for Sammy.
And you guys.
Yeah, I did not know.
So
you didn't know that? What the Avatar was?
He shows up, and he's an
know.
airbender.
Yeah.
He was trapped in an iceberg, so he shows up in the water tribe because they live on the North and South Pole, where everything's water, which makes sense. They're all the Eskimos. And he wakes up, and he meets fellow children and siblings, Katara and Sokka. They're 14 and 15 years old, and he's 12 years old. So it's a show about kids. They have Zuko hunting the Avatar from the Fire Nation. He is the bad guy. Fire Nation is the one that started the war. They're the Imperials, so to speak. They're the perpetrators of the war, and they're trying to capture the Avatar so that he can't win the war for the other side. They go to, so that's episode 1. Then they go to Kyoshi Island, which is an island named after the Avatar 2 before Aang. So she was an earthbender. And this was a departure from the animated show because they go to Kyoshi Island. So it's stuff like that where episode, I want to say 4 of the animated show, they go to Kyoshi Island because Aang wants to ride on the giant elephant koi fish. Every animal is a mix between 2 animals in the Avatar world.
Interesting.
So it's an elephant and a koi fish, and it's huge. It's just a big fish, which is a really fun lore thing, which, as you know about me, is kind of my jam. So in the animated show, they go and ride elephant koi fish, and then they meet other characters, and Zuko tracks them there, and they have a battle. But in this show, they go there so that Aang can talk to Kyoshi because he could communicate with the past avatars by going into the spirit world, which is a big thing in the Avatar universe. There's the natural world, I think they call it, and the spirit world. And in the spirit world, the Avatar is like the bridge between them, and you can communicate with other people in the spirit world. And then when avatars die, they go into the spirit world for the rest of time, it seems. So Kyoshi gets to talk to Aang, and we never saw that in the animated show. But we do get there has been 2 Kyoshi books, and they take place, hundreds of years before Aang's story. And they're all about Kyoshi. And there's like a lot of lore and a lot of story there that's not in the animated show, but it all is coherent with this show. And it's not like it has to be, because this isn't a canon show. This isn't canon to the Avatar universe, because this is just a remake. So it's not like they're going to continue the Netflix Avatar universe with all these other shows and movies that I talked about before. But it was nice that they included that. As a Star Wars fan, we talk about that a lot, that it's nice to feel like when you read these books and comics that if they reward you in some way, it's really satisfying. And so that was awesome that Kyoshi was in this, and her character was right in line with who she was in the books.
So do you think they're not going to do season 2 of the live action then as well?
I'm sure they are. It's just not going to be in the same universe.
Okay. Just making sure.
Then episode 3, they go to the Earth Kingdom city of Omashu, because Aang thinks he sees another airbender there, and he's the last airbender, so he was super excited. And he goes there, and it's just a kid with a hang glider, and so he's kind of bummed. But that was a whole episode in the animated show. They go, it's a different air temple that has a bunch of people in hang gliders going around, and then in the Netflix live action show, he's just at Omashu. But in the animated show, they also go to Omashu, but that's a separate episode. But in live action, they go to Omashu, and they have the hang glider, and the mechanist, who was Danny Pudi, the guy from Community, Ahmed. We talked about him last week. We talked about Community a little bit last week. But he was in the show, and he was the mechanist, which that is like a whole episode in the animated show. Jet is there, who's a non-bender freedom fighter, and that was a whole different episode, nothing to do with Omashu in the animated show. The secret tunnel under Omashu, also a whole episode in the animated show. And Iroh and Zuko also go to Omashu, and Iroh gets taken captive. Iroh is Zuko's uncle, the bad guys, the Fire Nation. And so these are all distinct episodes in the animated show, and they just bring it all into the same area so that they could, hit all the beats and do it all at the same time. And the way they did that, by and large, was extremely efficient, for one, just in terms of practicality. And also, it only ever helped the story of it. It only ever made it make more sense.
Yeah.
So all of that was incredible.
So you weren't disappointed that like you had an entire episode of like a kid that was hang gliding?
Well, no, I wasn't, because we got enough of that story in
the animated show.
In the live action show. So we had that story in the animated show, and they didn't just exclude it because they're not going to that air temple. They brought him to the other city so that they could still have that same story. And then, so like the Omashu parts were very obviously the exact same as all these other, but it's not just the Omashu episode from the animated show. It's the Jet episode, it's the Mechanist episode, and the Secret Tunnel episode, and it's just all taking place at the same time. There are parts when it feels like I'm watching 4 episodes of Avatar The Last Airbender all on 4 different screens right in front of me. I'm curious to see if people that haven't watched the animated show that are watching this find that odd or jarring, because it's like some of it is plot stuff and story development that makes sense in a vacuum in just the live action show. And then some of it is like the cabbage guy, who was like a running gag in the animated show that he keeps getting his cabbages destroyed by the
I remember the
Team
guy.
Avatar. And then in this show, it's like he does get his cabbages destroyed, and then he like shakes his fist at the screen and says, "My cabbages." And it's like, that's kind of funny because of the show, but because of the animated show. But like, if you didn't know that, it feels like a completely different show for a second, because the animated show is a kid's show by and large, and the Netflix show still is a kid's show. It's purely by definition because the main characters are kids. We've talked about that before. The only difference between an adult and a young adult book or show is just the age of the protagonist. And so I'll get to that later, but this is still a kid's show, but Netflix really wanted to age it up because they're still making it for, this sounds arrogant, but for me personally, because I was the target demographic in 2005. I was an 8-year-old, and they put it on Nickelodeon, and I watched it religiously, and I loved it. And now I'm a 26-year-old, and they're going to put it on Netflix and make it darker and grittier, and that's the textbook,
It's the iCarly way.
Yeah. That's a weird reference.
They swear now.
We're sticking to Nickelodeon.
Yeah.
And then episode 4, they go into the spirit world, which is the biggest departure from the animated show that we'd gotten yet. So in the animated show, Aang goes to the spirit world, but Sokka and Katara, his friends, never do. But in this show, they do. It's like an accident. They get trapped there. And then that was a great plot device for Sokka and Katara to develop a lot more than they get to in the animated show, because in the spirit world, they like have visions of their worst memories or something, which is like super convenient as a storytelling device to show where they had these experiences. And like Katara has to relive her mom dying to save her, and Sokka has to relive his dad saying he's disappointed in him for being a bad warrior, basically.
Wow, so one of those is significantly worse. Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, your mom dying really is tough.
That's like, yo, you get to
They're
experience...
siblings, so his mom died too. She just experienced it differently.
Man. She was there. He wasn't there.
You get to experience a death, or you stub your toe. It's like, the fuck? Yeah, the toe one.
Well, the death was so much worse for Katara because their mom was killed in a firebender raid on their village because they were trying to kill all of the waterbenders. And Katara's a waterbender, and her mom said that she was the waterbender so that they would kill her, and then Katara got to live. And so she's the last waterbender in her tribe because her mom sacrificed herself.
Now, I don't know a lot about physics, but fire does put out... The water puts out fire, correct?
Yeah, it's like Pokemon in a sense that it's super effective, and Earth is super effective against air. It's harder to redirect a boulder than it is a splash of water.
So how do they kill them then?
How do the firebenders kill the waterbender?
Yeah,
because Katara was 10 and she sucked at waterbending.
Right.
She wasn't a warrior.
I also like how I almost fucked that up and reversed what I was going to say. I don't know much about physics, but fire puts out water, correct?
As everyone knows, whenever your house is flooding, the fire department comes with the fire to put out the water.
I keep trying to get this idea off the ground.
So they're in the spirit world. They relive their worst memories, and they get taken captive by Ko, who's super cool creature design. Also the exact same as the animated version. And so I don't know. It's like cool to see it in live action, but it's like a scorpion snake kind of thing that has face. He steals faces is his gimmick, and so he has like a bunch of faces that he can loop around and choose a different one. And
that's cool.
It's really cool in animation. In live action, it's like such an otherworldly thing that it still kind of looks like animation. So it's like, what's the point? But it's stuff like that could be adapted better to live action, I think. But to save them, Aang goes to talk to another previous Avatar, Avatar Roku, the one right before him. And Roku was in the animated show a lot. He was like Aang's spiritual mentor, like his Ben Kenobi, and in a very literal sense because they're in the spirit world. And in this show, they change Roku a lot for almost no reason. That maybe it's because they had Kyoshi also, and they didn't want to have two previous avatars both be like stoic and spiritual wise leaders. But they made Roku kind of a kook, and it was just very jarring, and I didn't like it. Again, maybe it's because of my expectations based on the animated show that he wasn't the exact same, especially because everything else is the exact same. It's mind-boggling that they changed this if it's going to be for the worse.
Maybe that's why the creators left. They're like, that's dying on that hill.
Yeah, maybe. But Aang talks to Roku and gets a totem that Roku had stolen from Ko back 115 years ago or so. It's like a statue of Ko's mother, the Mother of Faces. And the Mother of Faces is a character from the comics. And so I haven't read that many Avatar comics, but I was so excited to see her because she wasn't in the animated show. And it was like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme. I was like, oh, I know that. And it's like how I used to feel in Star Wars, and now it's getting more jaded, and I'm like trying to expect it more. But it was so satisfying because it came out of left field for me, and I knew exactly what it was, and I loved it. But Aang uses that statue to trade back for his friends, and then, oh no, I'm sorry, that's in the animated, or because they're combining episodes in the Netflix show. On his way to break out his friends, Aang gets captured by Zuko and then subsequently Zhao, who's another Fire Nation lieutenant. I think he's a commander. But Zuko is on a mission to capture the Avatar. He's the prince of the Fire Nation. He's the Fire Lord's son. And Zhao is just some other commander. But Zhao is on a power trip trying to capture the Avatar first in order to get good favor,
Yeah.
And so Zuko captures Aang, and then Zhao takes him instead by orders or something. And then Zuko has to break Aang out of Fire Nation control because he wants to be the one to capture him. So he dresses up in a disguise as the Blue Spirit, and it's super cool. He uses swords instead of firebending, and he rescues Aang. And again, this sequence is very, very directly from the animated show. But the live action did a good job of separating Aang from Katara and Sokka, because in the animated show, Sokka and Katara were just sick, and Aang was out looking for medicine. Then he gets captured, and then he has this whole arc with Zhao and the Blue Spirit, and Sokka and Katara are just sick the whole time. And that would have been such a weird thing to include in the live action show if they didn't think of
Just
this.
have a cold.
I know. I mean, that's literally what it is
Yeah.
in the animated show. But Zuko and Aang break out of Fire Nation captivity, and again, very, very similar to the animated show, and it looks wonky in the animated show, and it looks outright dumb in live action.
Oh, no.
They have ladders, but they're just made out of like 2 or 3 stalks of bamboo, because everything is like Japanese and Oriental. It's like 2 or 3 stalks of bamboo with just rungs of other bamboo tied in the middle. And they go up, they're probably like 20, 30 feet tall, and they're on the top of the wall, and the Fire Nation are using these ladders to get them. And then Aang and Zuko take these ladders and like pole vault, put them down 20 feet ahead, launch across, and then while they're in the middle, they take the next one and do it again. And it's like, this looks weird. This doesn't seem like it would work. And I remember thinking that in animation, but you get a pass when it's animation. Physics isn't exactly 1-to-1, but in live action, I'm watching it and like, Aang's an airbender, so he can do stuff fantastical, but Zuko's with him and he can't.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That looked hokey. But then they get to that's the end of that episode. Then the next episode, they get to the Northern Water Tribe, which has been their mission kind of all season. In the second episode, Kyoshi had told Aang that there was an attack coming to the Northern Water Tribe, and as the Avatar, it's his responsibility to help and save them. And so they get to the Northern Water Tribe, and where are we?
Is this episode 7?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, this is episode 7 now. They get to the Northern Water Tribe and start preparing for the attack. Again, this is very similar to the animated show. All the characters are the same. They have all the same experiences. Han is introduced. He is in the animated show, he's kind of a foil to them, because they're there for like 2 or 3 or 4 episodes in the animated show before like the attack happens. And so he's like kind of their foil for a couple episodes, because you have to have like a bad guy and an arc in each episode. But in this, they just bypassed all of it, and Han was cool, and he liked them, and that was nice to see. So we didn't have to like waste our time with all that nonsense. Paku, the waterbending master, he's there, and again, he has the exact same design and costumes as the animated version. And for whatever reason, he's a human. He's an older guy, bald on the top of his head, but like really long hair on the back. Those looks. I don't know what it is, but like really long hair, like down to your back, a lot down your back. He looks stupid in my opinion. I'm curious if other people have watched it, if they also thought Paku looked stupid. I don't know if it's like his makeup or his wig or his facial hair. Something about him just looked wrong.
I know who this character is just by you even saying that. I feel
Really?
like,
From like
not
commercials?
having watched the show. Yeah.
So Katara, the other waterbender, from the Southern Water Tribe, she wants to learn how to fight under the master, and they say no, only men are allowed to fight. And there's this whole thing where she literally fights the patriarchy, and she says like, I'm gonna duel you, and she loses obviously because he's a master, but they garner a little respect.
Very George Lucas of them for them to do that.
For them not to let women fight.
Yes.
And then the invasion starts. Katara convinces Paku to let the women fight, and they battle, and then Zhao, the other Fire Nation guy, comes into their like sacred pool in the top of the Northern Water Tribe. He takes a war balloon that Sokka had helped design episodes earlier, which was a cool through line, especially because the war balloon obviously is in the animated show, but not until season 2 or 3. And so that was a a neat addition to a smart addition, I should say, to justify how they get from the siege at the Northern Water Tribe to like into their tallest tower in their most sacred place.
I feel like water or war balloon is a great child's word for a bomb. I'm gonna raise my child to say that.
And then the United States dropped a war balloon on Hiroshima.
Second Hiroshima reference in 2 episodes.
So Zhao gets into their sacred area and he is able to find the moon spirit that has like a physical entity as a fish, and he kills the moon spirit, and then the moon goes away. And the moon is like the waterbenders' source of power, so the waterbenders lose all their waterbending powers.
Yeah, the tides.
Yeah, and so then Aang, the Avatar, merges with the ocean spirit in retribution, so to speak, and becomes this massive ocean kaiju monster and destroys the Fire Nation and saves the day because the ocean was so mad that the moon was killed. And then the princess in the Northern Water Tribe sacrifices her life to save the moon spirit, and everything works out. The good guys win. There is a cliffhanger ending where the Fire Nation captures Omashu during the siege of the Northern Water Tribe, and apparently it was like a distraction, but that all happened off screen. But that's the plot overall. It is literally the exact same as the animated show. Some stuff they do better, some stuff they do worse. Bending in general, like bending the elements, every bending discipline looks better in animation. It's just so unnatural. Even if they get the effects exactly right, it's just looking at someone kick a boulder 5 times bigger than them 1,000 feet into the air. It's like that you can't do that, and it just looks so hokey in the real world.
Yeah.
Waterbending. So Katara's story arc or character arc, she's the last waterbender in the Southern Water Tribe, so she didn't have a master. She's just learning. So she's getting better and better throughout the entire show. In the beginning, she sucks at it, and she like hits someone with water, and I thought the show was doomed because it hit him with water, and then it turned around, and the guy was like kind of wet. It's like, this is the dumbest thing ever. Like, good job, Katara. Now he's wet. But by the end of it, the waterbending did look really cool, and maybe that was by design. Maybe they just invested more into the CG in the later fight scenes than the beginning ones. Airbending never looked good. In animation, they have, little squiggly lines to indicate motion in the wind.
Yeah.
In live action, they have leaves when it makes sense, but like, there's no leaves in the North and South Pole because there's no trees, and airbending looks dumb then.
A great way that they did it is in the movie Push. Does anybody remember that movie?
I do.
The 2008 Chris Evans superhero movie?
Yes.
That's, I think, one of the coolest powers is the Push.
I forgot about that. That was a good movie. I liked that.
Me too. The same year, I believe, the Hayden Christensen and Sam Jackson movie came out.
Jumper.
Also
a
great
good
movie. Yeah, it's very fun. Great power also.
Mm-hmm. Firebending looks pretty cool in live action. Like, fire is natural enough. The actual like fight choreography in live action is a lot more hand-to-hand combat and the occasional fire, as opposed to in animation when it looks like every firebender is holding 3 fire or flamethrowers. So that's kind of a bummer, but it still does look good. Earthbending we see very little of because it's all about the Water Tribe and stuff. Season 2 in the animated show, and I'm sure the live action show, is much more earthbending based, but earthbending never looked good. Maybe they're gonna figure out something better for season 2, but like I said, it's just so obviously not feasible and it looks just so unnatural. They try to maintain some physics in the animated show also. Like, most of the earthbenders are jacked because they're throwing boulders and stuff, but like the main earthbender character in the animated show is a 12-year-old girl, and she's not jacked, but she's a really good earthbender. So I don't know how they're going to do that in live action, but I'm getting ahead of myself because that's not season 1. We're just talking about season 1. The non-bending combat, Sokka is not a bender. There's a Kyoshi warrior named Suki who's also not a bender, and in the animated show, it comes up that they are combatants. They like fight in all the fights, but I mean, come on, what are you gonna do when someone throws a fireball at you and you have a boomerang. Like, you can do your best, but you're not going to help that much, which is why I'm really glad that this show treated Sokka so differently, that they didn't want to make him a pseudo warrior. They really leaned into him not being that good of a warrior because, come on, you're not going to fool us in live action.
Yeah.
That being said, it is easier to fool us in live action because there's less fire, the bending is less overpowered, so to speak, because they want to base it in reality and physics. And so, whereas in the show, they could, punch the air and then a metric ton of fire comes hurling at you. Whereas in the live action show, they have to do like 5 karate moves and then a fireball comes at you and you can dodge that and then make space. And so the non-bending combat was much better than it is in the animated show. But God, at what cost? Because bending is so much cooler. The characters overall, that's what makes a show. Aang, it's about the struggles of being a kid and a pacifist, because the airbenders are also pacifists, which is a fun lore thing, because that makes sense with like air, I don't know, it just makes sense. I'm not gonna get into it, but they make it work. And the fact that he's in a war and he's the Avatar as an airbender, so he has to fight the war, but as an airbender he wants to avoid the war, and that's interesting stuff. Overall, I liked him. Most of his development in the animated show comes in seasons 2 and 3, because season 1 has so much lore and world building to do, and it does it great in the animated and live action show. But I'm more or less reserving my judgment on Aang because he was solid. He didn't ruin it by any means, but it's not like he stole the show.
Yeah.
Katara, I gave her an rating. The development of her bending is great. She went from bad to good, and it really made sense. It felt like at times tabletop RPG where you're playing and you're like a sorcerer and there's like downtime and your DM asks, all right, what do you do during downtime? It's like, oh, I study my tomes so I can get better at magic. Literally every time Katara is not actively doing something in a scene, she's in the background just practicing waterbending. And it was like kind of odd that they kept doing it, but I really appreciate it because she does get substantially better. And over the course of the animated show, it kind of doesn't make sense because the time frame is so short. And I've seen that as a complaint or a criticism before, that it doesn't really make sense that she's a master in season 2 and such a novice in season 1. But I really like that they try to hammer down that she practiced a whole lot on their journey. That being said, I did not like her character arc that much. Being a child actor really makes it tougher because they're not that good at acting. Just being young, you don't have that skill developed or the experience. I don't want to sit here and shit on a 14-year-old girl's acting ability. So instead,
but this is a Star Wars podcast.
So instead, I will shit on the idea of making them children, because the animated show, they're kids, and that's why it's a kids show, and that's why I think they wanted to make a kids show, so they had to make the characters kids. The Netflix show, it's not a kids show. You don't have to make the characters kids. If anything, it's weird that you're making a show for adults and all the main characters are 12 and 14 and 15 years old.
And if the story is the same, the whole point is to basically create a jumping on point for an older audience.
That too, yes. So you don't need it it would be good to have them aged up for that. And there's not any story elements that necessitate them being kids.
Yeah.
Like if you're making a new Harry Potter,
they have to go to school.
Harry Potter goes to school, and he's the boy who lived. His parents were a big deal. Same with Percy Jackson. It takes place at a summer camp, and it's all about their parents, and they don't live to be adults. This show, in live action or animation, has nothing to do with the fact that they're kids. They just happen to be kids. So, given no restraints, you really just put yourself in a hole to make your characters kids, especially because that makes it harder for seasons 2 and 3 when your kids are going to age 3 years and they're only supposed to age 3 months. It's going to look hokey. But there's such a demand across every fan base, Star Wars included, that you have to adhere to the source material or else. And it's like, yeah, I get that you're afraid to do something different. And if there's even a little thing, the smallest thing bad with your show, 1,000 people can yell at you and say, why didn't you just stick to the source material? It was right there. You're an idiot. I wish that they hadn't in this instance. I wish that they had made every character 10 years older. Nothing would have been undone by it. There's no reason not to. That bothered me. And that's a lot of the reason why I didn't like Katara. Her acting was only okay. also, a large part of the reason I did like Katara, I think, in the animated show is because I was 7 when it came out, and Katara was my first crush.
Oh.
And so 26-year-old Luke doesn't have the same sexual attraction to 14-year-old Katara as
thank God.
7-year-old Luke did, even when it was animated. I'm not ashamed of that, and I think that the creators maybe could have seen that coming a little bit more. I'm just saying, in season 1 in the animated show, Katara also doesn't develop that much because she there's so much world building and stuff. Most character development is in seasons 2 and 3. She does fight the patriarchy at the end, and that's a great moment. But
that was actually what the creative differences were over. The other creators were like, can we get someone old enough to legally call hot?
Oh no.
Why? Well, I'm sure our audience had a crush on her when she was 14.
Going off of that, this is a statement and then a question. This is also perfect time to mention that you've shaved your head to go as one of the characters from The Last Airbender.
Yes. I had a whole segment about how much I like Avatar The Last Airbender that I never got to.
The question is, do you think that's cultural appropriation?
Aang's white. No,
is he? I was just kidding either way.
They are heavily based off of Buddhist monks and, Indian culture, but no, Aang's white. But yeah, I'll come back to it. The other characters that I wanted to talk about, it's all of them. Sorry if you were hoping this would end soon. Sokka. He is a strict improvement on the animated show. One of the only things that's different, again, and he's better. In the animated show, he's
I remember not liking him in the animated show.
Yeah, he's the one that makes a lot of the kids jokes. He's the comic relief, and the comic relief in a kids show is kind of a tough role. Yeah. He's also not a bender, so he's kind of underpowered. He is kind of rude. He's sexist towards Katara and other women. He's kind of dislikable. He gets better in seasons 2 and 3, but in terms of just season 1, he's definitely the worst part of the animated show, but he was one of the best parts of the live action show. Great charisma, and he had an arc about being a hero without being a warrior, which again, you kind of need to go that route in a world of benders if you're not a bender. Next is Zuko, who is my favorite character in the animated show. Season 1, he doesn't have all that much to do in terms of development, again, like everyone else. But the things that they changed about Zuko for the live action is great changes. So they have his father, the Fire Lord, in animation, hates him. He says that Azula, his sister, was born lucky, and Zuko was lucky to be born, which is a savage comment, especially to say to your own son.
Yeah, that's a line.
But that's in animation. In live action, he's just really disappointed in him over and over again, which is almost worse. Zuko very famously has a big fire scar on his eye, and it was given to him by his father for disrespecting him. And in animation, it's like he has like one little outburst in a war council meeting, and then he has to one-on-one, it's called an Agni Kai, fire duel with his dad, and he refuses to fight, and he just gets the shit burned out of him. In live action, it's almost the same thing. He has the outburst, and then he like bites his tongue, and then he gets up in the most dramatic way possible and says, "No, this is wrong," and like it's everyone's attention, and yeah, so it's a lot worse. It's not that I sympathize with Ozai, the Fire Lord, in this one, but I kind of get it. You got to teach that kid some respect. So they have the Agni Kai, and Zuko does fight, and he like holds his own really well, and then he has like a headshot on Ozai, but he holds back, and then Ozai gets really mad for showing weakness, and so then he gives him the scar, which is a lot more nuanced for Zuko, a lot more nuanced for Ozai. It's all good stuff. His relationship with Iroh is more clearly illustrated. Iroh is his uncle, who's like everyone's favorite part, very wholesome, sage, wise old man.
Loves his tea.
Loves his tea. They talk about, it's a season 2 episode, the Tales of Ba Sing Se, where you learn about Iroh's backstory, and they just included that in season 1. So it's kind of unfair to say if you're comparing like the Zuko Iroh relationship in season 1 of each show, because they just kind of lifted some of the stuff from season 2 into season 1 for this one. But Iroh lost his son in the war, and so Zuko he treats Zuko like his son now, and you just get to see more of that. You like see some of the funeral of Luten, Iroh's son, and you see Zuko kind of console Iroh, and it's really sweet. the last thing about Zuko was probably my favorite, and it's because it's something that I never thought about. Like it almost felt like a Morpher thought. His crew. So he's the banished prince, forced to hunt for the Avatar. When Zuko got his face burned and banished from the Fire Nation, it was 3 years before the start of the show. So the Avatar has been missing for 97 years, and his dad said, "Go find the Avatar, and you can't come back until you do." So it's a fool's errand. He's basically banished for life, and he's just out looking for the Avatar. He has a warship and a crew, and it posited like, why is it sucks for his crew that they are essentially no longer members of the Fire Nation. Also, they have to be aboard this banished prince's ship, assumedly for life, maybe. But the outburst that Zuko had at the War Council meeting that got him banished in the first place was because they were going to sacrifice this battalion of troops in a diversion so that they could attack somewhere else. And they were all new recruits, and they talked about how, you got to sacrifice people, and it is what it is. And Zuko said, no, that's wrong. And it was that battalion that Zuko stood up for that Ozai assigned to be his crew. So it's nice that, like, you guys all would be dead if it weren't for Zuko, and now you're doomed to crew his ship for the rest of time, but it would have been worse. And I loved that story beat because I never had that question about why Zuko's troops are still loyal to him if he's basically not even in the Fire Nation. But now that I have, it makes total sense, and I loved that.
It's a great way to really tie a bow on that too, because if he did stop them from being sacrificed, you do have to wonder, like, if everyone else is like, yeah, you know what? Going back to what he said, though, that is kind of unfair. I do think we should not sacrifice ourselves for this.
Exactly. Next character is Zhao, our first Star Wars character of the day. He plays Admiral Statura. It's Ken Jeong. He plays Admiral Statura in The Force Awakens. He was also Miles in Lost, and not Jin-Tao. Jin-Tao's henchman in Rush Hour.
Love Rush Hour.
That is a deep cut reference there. I did not know that he was in Rush Hour, though. That's interesting.
You remember him now that I mentioned it, though?
I did not know that was the same actor.
He's the guy that says Rush Hour. He gets the title card line.
Is there a problem, officer?
No problem.
No problem. Just Rush Hour.
Zhao is far better in this show than he is in animation. In animation, he's not quite mustache twirly because that's kind of the Fire Lord, but he is the named bad guy in almost every episode because, Zuko's supposed to be the bad guy, but he's on a redemption arc and he's doing his own thing. And Zhao is just the presence of the Fire Nation throughout trying to foil all of the Avatar's plans. In this show, it's great how much is the exact same and how much is different. He's got like the same role, but in live action, he's sleazy and desperate for praise and wants to be a legend. He's like trying really hard to level up his status in the Fire Nation, and that just wasn't present in the animation. So, I mean, giving him any sort of character arc and development at all is a step up. But also, Ken Leong, I'm not just saying this because he's the first Star Wars guy, but his acting was really elevated this show, his performance of Zhao, because that could have been such a one-note character, and it kind of was in animation when he was voiced by Jason Isaacs, who's another Star Wars alum who plays the Grand Inquisitor in Rebels.
And Lucius Malfoy in Harry Potter.
Yes. So Zhao was great. Azula? ? That's how I wrote it, because Azula is the princess of the Fire Nation, Zuko's sister. She's not in season 1 in animation, but she was in season 2. But because they went with the exact same plot for each show, they had to they felt the need to include Azula, but she's not actually present in anything. So they just have her in the Fire Nation the whole time, kind of doing her own thing. And she's like training and trying to prove herself. And then at the end, it's revealed when they had captured Omashu that she was the one that captured it. And it's like, okay, but that all happened off screen. Why did we need her to be in any of this at all? I thought that was a bit odd. Ozai, the Fire Lord, also was not in season 1 of the animated show, but he's in this, and he is cool as hell. That was a strict improvement because he wasn't in it at all in season 1 in the animated show, so low bar, but every scene with Ozai, I was on the edge of my seat because he's just so evil, kind of Palpatine-y. He's just, everything he does is so sinister, and you are like scared to see what he's going to do next, but you're also super interested. And he was in animation. He was voiced by Mark Hamill, another Star Wars alum. He plays Luke Skywalker. Last character, Iroh. Another Star Wars alum. He's played by Paul Seung-Hoo Lee, who plays Carson Teva in The Mandalorian, who we all like.
Yes.
He is also solid. No notes, kind of like Aang. No notes, very, very similar to his animated counterpart. His backstory is just early. You know, you can't say it's better or worse. There are certain moments when Iroh is such a legendary character in the animated show that you remember his lines better. And so there are times when I was watching the Netflix show and I was like quoting it because I knew the line was about to come, but I'd never seen the show. And it's like that level of predictability that I just couldn't believe.
Do you think someone got paid to write the script? They were like, hey,
Yeah.
you gotta watch the show and just kind of like write down everything that you see in here.
That's literally what it was.
That's probably why the
Or do you think
creators
they
were
can
like,
have
"What the
AI
fuck?"
do that? Is that something that you can just like type into AI, chat GPT?
man.
Like,
After the
write
Willy
me an
Wonka
8-episode script.
after the
of
Willy
Avatar.
Wonka experience, I don't think so.
Interesting.
But that's every character that I wanted to talk about. Basically every character in the show. Overall, it's a hard recommend. I love the animated show, and this show is so similar that I can't not love it. I'd be interested to see if people that haven't watched the animated show also love it as much, especially in regards to them being kids. Because, like I said, it's an unforced error to make them kids when they don't need to be, and it would be so much of a better show if they were all just a little bit older. Not to mention in the animated show, you know, Aang and Katara fall in love, and at the end they are in love, and then they grow up and have kids together, and the kids are in the next Avatar's show. But it's weird to have a live action 12-year-old and a live action 14-year-old have a romantic relationship.
Yeah,
Like I remember it was kind of weird in animation when they kiss at the end and it's like an open mouth kiss. And like that took me aback because it's animation for one and they're kids for
But
another.
in live action, when you see him banging with full penetration, you're like, dear God.
Exactly. It's Netflix. Who knows what they'll do?
Oh, thank God it's not HBO.
or Showtime.
All right. That's all my notes. I wanted to talk before about how much I like Avatar because I really, really like Avatar, and I wanted to have a reason to put that picture of me dressed as Aang up on the screen right now. I'll send it to you, Max. You can edit it in because I shaved my head and painted an arrow on my head for Halloween. And those of you that watch on YouTube know what a sacrifice that is because my hair is my best quality. So I did it, and it was worth it for
You do
my
have
love
great
of
hair.
Avatar. Thank
I
you.
thought that was a tattoo, by the way, the blue.
It was permanent. I've had it since. Yeah, that's everything I have to say. It's a hard recommend. I hope everyone watches it, and I also would really like to hear other people's opinions because almost everything I do online is centered around Star Wars, and so I don't really dedicate the time or energy to reading other reviews on Avatar The Last Airbender or like hitting up their Reddit pages or whatever I do for Star Wars. So reach out to us and let us know what you think about the live action show.
I have a couple thoughts myself too that I want to talk about real quick because it is funny how you said like it's like a similar runtime, but to me 8 episodes feels so much more digestible. So I'm like, I probably am gonna watch it at some point because it's only 8 episodes. That's easy enough to do.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that I really want to talk about to kind of relate this back to Star Wars is the difference between animation and live action because I feel like for some reason there's a very popular YouTube channel, Star Wars channel, where this guy, all he wants is just a live action remake of the Clone Wars. Like that's all he wants. And it's like you have that though. Like why do you want that in live action, you know?
No, yeah.
And then when you finally
That'd be. How would you even do that? Oh my God, that is actually infuriating.
I mean,
to think about.
he lost his shit during that episode of Ahsoka where
I'm
the
sure.
flashback sequence and all that kind of stuff. Like that's all he wants, and it's like, but I don't get that. But the thing
Yeah.
is, going back to Ahsoka, is people are also disappointed when it's like you see Ahsoka in the animation and she's doing like these like twists and flips and like 720s
Yeah.
and everything, and then she's not exactly doing that in her show, in the
Yeah.
live action Ahsoka show. And I always have to think about how animation is a stylization. It is
Yeah.
like it's a creative art that is just different than live action. Like it's not a 1-to-1 translation. So it makes sense that like it's hard to see bending in live action and be like, yeah, that looks good. Like that's something that like it was made for animation. Like not everything that's in animation can be carried over into live action. And I think that's a lot of the feedback that I've been seeing was just a lot of complaints like, oh, it just looks goofy. It looks goofy. And it's like, but what did you expect? And I guess that kind of comes back to the bigger point of like why they even made this to begin with. But you know, I think it is to kind of create like a jumping on point. Like they are moving on. They're doing all these other series and movies and
But
ventures
that's the
and
thing,
stuff.
because it's unrelated from all that other stuff. Because this is Netflix, and that's all Avatar Studios.
No, but it's still a jumping on point. I mean, it's still something that you can see and be like, oh, you know what? I kind of want to watch this other stuff. Like, oh, all the fans say that the animation is better. Or like, oh, now I got to follow, like, watch seasons 2 or 3 or watch Korra and things like that.
That's how it is in Star Wars, though. But that's what I'm saying is different. That the Netflix show is completely unrelated financially as a business entity, story-wise from all the other, not well, story-wise in a sense, like a continuity-wise, but story-wise from all the stuff that's going to be coming in the future from Avatar Studios.
Mhm.
But Netflix is doing its own thing. It's like a spin-off of Avatar almost. That's just the same show, though.
So it's like a Star Wars show that's not by Lucasfilm.
Yes, it would be like that.
That's interesting.
It would be a Star Wars show that is just a remake of the original trilogy made by a different company.
Oh, that is weird.
Yeah.
It's a very bizarre situation.
Speaking of creating Avatar, though, I feel like we should plug Dave Filoni.
Yeah, he was heavily involved in season 1 of the animated show. Most of the better episodes, I'd say, are directed by him. When I was rewatching it this last time, I kept an eye out for all the ones I liked, and I would watch through the credits, and I'd be like, oh, I knew it. It was directed by Dave Filoni.
That was where he cut his teeth before joining Lucasfilm and doing the Clone Wars and stuff. That's what he was working on when he got reached out to by George Lucas.
Mm-hmm. He's talked before about it and how he was sad to leave Avatar, but it was always his dream to work on Star Wars. And he said like Avatar was amazing because of the creators, Brian Konietzko and Michael Dante DiMartino. And he said it was amazing before I got there, and I knew it would be amazing after I left. So it really wasn't that hard of a decision, which is nice.
What a classy dude.
What a classy dude.
But that's all I have. I have these 3 notes. I'm going to include them because I wrote them down. And it was just so much fun thinking about it. But Avatar came out from 2005 to 2008, and I was 7 in 2005, and so I was the prime demographic. I was watching Nickelodeon. I remember such vivid memories of watching the season 2 episode Zuko Alone at my grandparents' house. I couldn't tell you what we did that weekend because my grandparents live far away, and I know my parents weren't there, and you weren't either, unless you remember watching Zuko Alone with me that day. I couldn't tell you why I was there, or what else we did that weekend, but I know I could tell you the exact chair that I watched that episode in. And similarly, I remember watching Crossroads of Destiny at our other grandparents' house because I was watching it in grandma's room on her TV, and she just had it like set up in front of her bed, and I was sitting on the foot of her bed watching the Crossroads of Destiny, and that's the season 2 finale, and it was like a big deal. And then everyone else was living their life in the living room or something, not wanting to watch Avatar. But then Mom came in and said it's time to go, and I made her wait until a commercial so that we could try to make it all the way home before the next.
No way.
Our grandparents lived close, but no, we did not make it. I missed some, and it was devastating.
It was devastating.
And then the finale aired in summer of 2008. And Max, if you recall, we were on a family vacation, and I feigned illness on one of the nights to stay in the hotel room and watch the 4-part finale. And it was awesome. I'll always remember that we were in a hotel, and our family and had all gone out to dinner, and I was like, oh, I'm not feeling well. I'll just stay here. And then I sat in a hotel room and watched all 4 of these episodes, and then they came home and they're like, hey, look how you feeling. I'm like, oh, I'm all better. That was a nice time I had.
That's
I
hilarious.
do not remember that at all. That's so funny.
Stay tuned next week for when we talk about some of the best insults in all of Star Wars. Follow us on social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and we'll see you then.
See you, Sammy.